think we'll just have a minute. So we're live now, it's saying.
Oh, it says, can everyone hear us?
They won't be able to speak.
Oh, could they type it in the live comments?
Yes, someone's put, I'm hoping it'll just appear on here. Yes.
Yes. Oh, we are, right? Okay. Yeah, perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm Fazana. I'm the admin on Whole Class Reading Group. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm really looking forward to this session, and a special thanks to Maddie for joining us. For those that don't, oh, yeah, lots of yeses that they can hear us and see us, hopefully. Can you see us as well? Yeah, I hope they can.
Yeah.
For those that don't know Maddie, Maddie's an English consultant, and I've attended lots of sessions delivered by Maddie, and they've always been excellent. The sessions where I've left with lots of resources and practical ideas that I can use in my classroom the following day. And I'm sorry, Maddie, I know after the session I always email to ask more questions, and my questions never end. So Maddie's been great at helping me develop reading in my previous school and my current school as well. So I am really looking forward to the session. And just to add, just before I hand you over to Maddie for the session, if you have any questions as you're listening to Maddie, please can you type them? I can see your live comments. If you type them there as you're listening to the session, then at the end of the session, when Maddie's finished her session, we'll have about 20 minutes of Q&A, and I'll go through the questions, and hopefully Maddie will be able to answer them. And as you can see Maddie's email, if later you wanted to ask any further questions, please do. Maddie's really good, because I know I constantly ask questions. She will help you. Right, so I'll hand you over to Maddie, and I'm really looking forward to this session. Thank you, Maddie.
Hi, everybody. It's brilliant to be able to celebrate your 14.6 thousand members in your group. And it's a privilege to be able to speak to people again. I know that some of you might have watched the Primary Rocks webinar that I did a few weeks ago. So it's brilliant that you're able to attend this one. Just to kind of reiterate what Fazana said, if people are interested in watching it at a later date, hopefully we're going to be able to download it and put it on the YouTube channel. So Fazana mentioned a lot of resources that I normally share. Because I've only got half an hour, 40 minutes today, I was just going to do a bit of back to basics on reading. So please, if you want to download any free resources, they're either on my website, or if you want to subscribe to the YouTube channel. But first and foremost, it's brilliant to see so many people interested in reading, and obviously that's my passion. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and hopefully you will enjoy the presentation. I know I've got a PowerPoint, but it feels a bit weird not to have one when I can't see anybody in front of me. So it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. I'm just putting them up as a bit of an aid memoir for myself. If you want to share the PowerPoint in school at a later date, feel free to share the PowerPoint. Fazana's going to add it to the file on your group. So let's kick off with some questions. I just wanted to, sorry, it won't be a moment. I just wanted to pose some questions that I thought you might be considering ahead of school being back in full motion in September. I know they might be quite small on your screen, but when you get the PowerPoint, you'll be able to expand on them at school. But some of these questions, for me, in my work as a consultant in a lot of primary schools, both in the UK and abroad, I know that most schools could answer yes to the first two. So have you got high quality text across all year groups? I think most schools could say, yeah, we have. And are all members of staff posing high quality questions? I think teachers are massively skilled up on that. And anybody who has members of staff that need support, they're able to also support them to write the questions. The third bullet point, I think, is a big one. So do all staff model and demonstrate high quality answers? We always do that in writing. I know that we always show children what a good one looks like. So something I'm working on with the schools that I regularly work with, please type some questions in, and we'll answer those at the end. But something that I know that I work with a lot of schools is, are the teachers or the adult, doesn't always have to be a teacher, but are they modelling on a whiteboard how to answer a reading question, and perhaps showing children a variety of reading questions and saying which one best answers that question. And I think that's huge. There's so many children who can verbalise and articulate a high quality answer, but when you ask them to write that high quality response down, what they transfer into the written form is not always as powerful or as good as what they actually said. And I think some of that gets lost in translation. So I think we do need to work a bit harder on the high quality answers. So I've got a separate slide on that perhaps you could expand on back at school. The fourth bullet point. Now, this perhaps isn't, it's not a knee-jerk reaction to recent events, but I think it's a good time while we've got this kind of transition back into everybody coming back in September. You know, does the diet of literature reflect your school community? Now, I'm not an expert on this by any stretch, but I know on Twitter, Darren Shetty, his Twitter tag is @rapclassroom, and there's a few other people who are amazing, and he always gets back to people, amazing at being able to discuss what type of reading materials are genuinely the right ones for different communities. And that's not a token gesture of let's have a look at Black History Month in October, but rather, you know, the makeup of your school community, do they see themselves in the literature? And the fifth bullet point, it's not contentious, but it's a bit controversial at the moment, because everybody's kind of thinking about what's the best way to start back in September. And, you know, common sense is that high quality teaching, which is everything we've already just said this evening. But there has got to be an element of progression through the year. And I'm going to kind of talk about that the whole way through tonight. And I don't want anybody to get themselves worked up about it, or, you know, thinking they've got to redo the whole reading spine. But the text that we present to children in September should be easier than what we present to them in the summer. And that might sound really straightforward, but I work with a lot of schools who might have, you know, a really tough novel in autumn 2 of year 5, and then nothing again is as hard as that for the rest of the academic year. And I'm not sure where that fits in, because when children are taking reading books home, hopefully they'll be able to take books home in September, but we've got a quick fix for that if they can't. But if children are taking a reading book home, what they take home in the summer term is going to be harder than what they took home in the autumn. So what we serve up to them, I always like to talk about it like food and a diet. You know, what we serve up to them as a starter in autumn should be easier than their main course in the spring. So we do need to think carefully about when we're mapping out progression of texts, and what happens in the summer of year 4 should be slightly easier than the autumn of year 5, but not too much of a gap, because there's always that summer gap. Something for people to be thinking about is how are you assessing reading, and what does your evidence look like for pupil progress? But I'm not going to delve too much into that, because I've got basically 40 minutes, and that might take a whole afternoon. But just to keep that on the back burner, you know, how are we actually saying where children are up to? Is it on reading records? Is it on what Alex quickly would call soft data? You know, not a standardized test, but on a reading record, a book band, a PM benchmark. And then finally, that final bullet point, I know we haven't got anybody in year 1 who's passed the phonics screening this year because they haven't had the test, but if you are not in year 1 and you're an English lead, I would make sure there's a real kind of conscious effort that the children, and in year 2, because they will have missed a big chunk of year 1, a lot of them, is there a balance between decoding and comprehension skills? Because if they're just coming as decoders, that's going to cause, you know, on the simple view of reading, for those people who maybe have forgotten what that is from their uni days, it's that quadrant that's got comprehension versus, I look like I'm doing some crazy dance, comprehension versus phonics. And obviously the ideal is that all children are in that top right quadrant where they're good at both. but we've obviously got children who are decoders and not comprehenders, the comprehenders and not decoders, and then any child who falls into the quadrant where they struggle with both. But that's going to be quite significant for Key Stage 1 this year, and for our current year 3, the year 3 of 2020, because they are going to have missed probably a lot of what their year 2 teachers would have done on paper 2. And for those who don't do SATs, tonight's not all about SATs, but SATs are a good indicator of pitch. You know, what does age-related text look like in year 2? So this is the slide that I referred to just a moment ago. If you are managing reading, that would be where you're aiming for, the top of that ladder. So your children are reading for pleasure. And I'm going to mention Alex Quigley a few times tonight, because I was lucky enough to do one of his free webinars a few weeks ago on Teachology. If you can get on any of Alex Quigley's free stuff, he's brilliant, just brilliant. And he talks a lot about reading for pleasure, and how a lot of schools have got an agenda that they want every child to read for pleasure for a certain amount of time a week. And it was kind of like maybe something really obvious, but he reminded us all that actually a child can only read for pleasure if they're a fluent reader. And if you're not a fluent reader, reading is not going to be pleasure. So if we just kind of remind ourselves that those children in our setting who are not fluent won't be reading for pleasure, they will comprehend for pleasure if you're reading, but their own sat with a book won't be pleasure if they're not fluent. So in order to get our children fluent, they would be the 3 rungs on the ladder for me. And as I said earlier, but I know quite a few people have joined since I read the first slide, most schools are on that second layer, the high quality questions. And to me, the high quality modelled answers is an area that I think is one area that I support lots of schools with. How are we demonstrating to children what high quality answer looks like? And sometimes we get our papers back from reading tests, or we look in the PIRA mark scheme or NFER or whatever you use to assess reading, and you think, God, I would have given that mark, and they've not got it. And that's about the precise of reading. And this is where people will nod along, and I wish I could see you all. It's so weird not to be able to see faces back, but this is where when we're teaching reading, we've got to be a bit tough. You know, we've got to say to children, that's wrong, which is what we would say in maths. But I know when we're teaching reading, lots of us say, I can see where you're coming from, but we can't. We just say that because we want to give them a bit of credit. Or we might say to a child, interesting, what did you think? And quickly move to someone else. And for me, you know, that's crediting an incorrect response. And it's not mean. They're fine in maths. If they get the wrong answer in maths, some of us don't even respond. We just move to another child. I know I was probably awful. I used to say things like, did you just say 2? And then I'd move to somebody who was listening. So what I would like to just kind of confirm, or to kind of reiterate, is that high quality modelled answers is really important. Okay, this is a slide that Alex Quigley has given me permission to use. I did use it on the Primary Rocks webinar. I love it. I mean, I can't remember what you call them. Somebody will probably type in what they're called, those things that you do the chatter box, I think they are. So, you know, I think lots of us will be considering in September for reading, what do we need to stop doing and what do we need to start doing? What do we need to do more of? What do we need to do less of? And for me, the biggest section of the Pentagon there is what do we need to keep doing, but maybe do a bit differently, in terms of taking into account that the children have missed part of their academic year. What's the greatest thing about reading is you can read to them. So go in aspirational, you're going to read the text to them. So let's not worry too much about if they're age related. Let's expose them to age related. They can have a book that they take home that is addressing their decoding and fluency and stamina, but let's do a really exciting text with them in September that they can get their teeth into, something that you love. I'm passionate about teachers teaching text that they love. And something else which makes me a bit different to perhaps advice that other people give is, I'm really passionate that the teacher needs to know that text. I'm not saying you need to know it inside out, but if you're doing a novel I believe that you should have read it before you teach it. I know there's people who say, no, you can read it alongside the children. I get that in reading for pleasure to an extent. But if you're reading to teach, we need to know what's coming, to write the best questions. And equally, you know, I worked with a school who were doing the Demon Dentist, and both of the teachers hadn't read the text. And they were 2/3 of the way through with year 4, I think. And yeah, year 4 do teeth, don't they, in science? So they were doing it in year 4, and they were 2/3 of the way through. And they said, I said, you know, you're all right that the dad dies, aren't you? You know, you haven't got any children who've experienced death recently. And both teachers were very upset with themselves because they did have a child in both classes who had experienced the death of a father in the summer. And obviously they owe it to that child to say, listen, I'm going to give you a heads up. This is going to happen in this book. Are you all right with us doing it? You know, for that child to find out alongside the teacher, is hard to manage something so sensitive. So I think we need to know the book. So perhaps have a think about maybe using that slide back at school when you're thinking about reading, and you're thinking about the provision of reading and how you're going to manage reading in the autumn term. Is there something you need to do more of? You know, do you need to stop doing something that you would ordinarily do? So perhaps we might ordinarily baseline them all in the autumn with a standardized test. Perhaps you might not do that till December. I think we all know that children are going to have gaps. They're going to have lost learning. So let's not depress ourselves and find out something that we already know. Let's teach them for 7-8 weeks, and then maybe do some form of assessment in reading once we've exposed them. So dip in and out of that slide back at school. In terms of this slide, what does progression look like in text chosen? I always like to talk about this with people, but I can't do it tonight because I can't involve you all in the discussion. But please ask in the questions about this. You know, what makes one text harder than another? Is it vocabulary? Most likely. Plot, complexity of plot, yeah. Character, you know, is it subtlety of character or a character betraying us? Themes, is it the themes of a book, or is it the content? Now that can be particular for our greater depth readers who want to be able to read books that are suitable for them in terms of the ability, but that the content is too hard, particularly if you've got greater depth in year 5 and 6, because they're trying to read young adult literature where the content is inappropriate. And the final bullet point, and I know lots of you, because I know so many people are flashing up pictures, and I've worked with you, and obviously people all around who are doing really great reading with picture books. So let's not underestimate that progression means a longer book. Some of our shortest picture books, so The Little Mouse and the Red Wall, I've just read that today at school with some NQTs. The complexity of that, or Grandpa Green, picture book complexity, you know, anything with Francesca Sanna on, Armengerder's The Island, you know, all of those picture books perhaps have got more discussion points in them than 5 or 6 chapters of another novel. So let's not think that length of book equates to progression. And something like The Arrival, I know lots of you use Sean Tan's The Arrival. It hasn't got any words in it, but it's a very complex text, and in order to have that deeper comprehension, children have got to perhaps work harder because they've got to fill in the inference. So that might be something worth exploring back at school. And this was a slide I used in the Primary Rocks. And I am a Harry Potter fan, but I do really believe that we must all face the choice between what's right and what's easy. And if anything we've learned in lockdown, we have perhaps been given an opportunity to reflect on what we do. And if we're going to make any changes, now's a good time. So if there's a text that's always done in your year group, and the planning's all there for it, the resources are all there for it, so it's easy, then maybe be that risk taker who says, but it's not right. It's not the right book for this cohort. And I've worked in a lot of schools that are 2, 3. One of my schools in Milton Keynes is 6 form entry. One of the schools I work with in Oman is, I think, 4 form entry. You know, not all 4 teachers or 6 or 2 or 3 are going to love the same book. But, you know, I believe you've got to be passionate. And as long as you can say those children have had the same experience of comprehension, the tool that you use, the vehicle that you use should be something you're passionate about, and not just doing the easy choice. So someone else has done all the planning for it, so I'm going to go with that because it's easy. And obviously, if you love it, then that's bonus, isn't it? But if you know it's not right for your cohort, I think we're going to have to be sensitive in the autumn term about what text we're using. So, you know, some people's, you know, I know Barry Carpenter's saying use texts that are about lockdown. Some people are saying I'm not going to do World War II because it's too close to the bone with, you know, evacuation and so on. It's, you know, your kids. The teacher who had them last year will be able to say, I don't think that book's right for them. They're very immature, or yeah, that's, or no. So have that conversation. We want children to be able to talk, but not necessarily about the last 7 months, but we want them to be able to talk about literature. Okay, I've just put in an advert for Madeline Leigh, because if you are looking for anybody who's an expert in books, it's them. If you're not in England, there is a phone number to ring, and if you're ringing from outside the UK, so they will basically find you a book on whatever you want. So please use them. Right, this is something that I reckon lots of us are kind of thinking. Do the children in our schools read, or do they really read? And what I mean by that is, have we got children, sorry, that seems to be not showing all on the screen, but you'll see it on the slides. Have we got children who can do all of these skills? Now, I'm not going to spend ages on content domains. What I am going to do is put them side by side and kind of have that conversation of what is different about 1A and 2A. What is different about 1B and 2B? If you haven't done that as a staff, I would sit down and have that conversation. Perhaps not a socially distant conversation on Teams or Zoom or something, but kind of say, you know, what do they have to be able to do in Key Stage 2 and inference that they don't do in Key Stage 1? And what you'll probably get is the text is harder. The skill is the same, but the text is harder. So yes, at Key Stage 1, the inference is just make inference. Key Stage 2, they've got to justify it with evidence from the text. But I know most Year 2 teachers ask the children to prove it in whatever fun way. You know, point to the evidence, show your partner the evidence, crop the evidence. You know, however they're doing it, they're always, early years practitioners ask the children, can you put a because in? The witch felt angry because, and they're encouraging their children to justify. So although it is in the Key Stage 2 domain, I know that a lot of Key Stage 1 and early years teachers do ask children to justify. So it's really important, particularly for our Year 3 teachers, because they're going to have that merging of content domains from Key Stage 1 to 2. So again, reminding ourselves that sequencing 1C, the progression of sequencing is 2C summary. But in order to be able to summarize, you have to be able to sequence. So I offer lots of reading training on summary, because I believe even though 1C and 2C are not on the top of the list for what questions are tested in SAT, which isn't the be all and end all, we know, but for anybody in the UK, we have to do it. If children can't summarize what they've read, as in what was the gist of what you just read, they're not going to be able to do the inference and retrieval. So that slide there, I'm just going to see if I can sort that out a bit for you. Hopefully that's done it. That slide there, planning to teach all of the content domains. I know that lots of people are able to say, in September, there's certain elements of maths that I'm not going to teach. I'm not going to teach till the spring. And math specialists will probably pick me up on this after this because it's gone out live. I'm not going to pretend to know what bits of maths you might not touch till spring. But in reading, we're not going to save a content domain till January. There's nobody listening to this who's thinking, let's not do inference till January. We'll be doing all of the domains, but with easier text in the autumn. So when we look at the makeup of the Key Stage 1 Paper 1, it's really obvious that most of the questions are retrieval. But let's not be under the illusion that retrieval means easy. And when we move into Paper 2 for Key Stage 1, you can see there's a more even spread of skill across Liam the Park Keeper. Sorry to bring this paper up for those people who've kind of left Liam and Dora to one side, but they're our most recent suite of tests. So we have got more retrieval, inference and vocabulary questions coming through. If we just kind of look at this very briefly, Key Stage 1 retrieval questions look very different to each other. Like some of them are what's he called, but any Year 2 teacher watching will say that that question there, number 2, which area of the park does Liam keep particularly nice for visitors, was absolutely solid. It wasn't a very simple retrieval where, you know, you throw the ball and you come back and find the answer, because the word particularly nice wasn't even in the text. It was especially the rose garden. So it's not simple retrieval that they're not looking for the words in the question. So all I wanted to kind of remind people of tonight as well is that retrieval are not easy. You know, that's true or false question is retrieval. You know, they're not all straightforward. So sometimes people say, oh, we're going to do a lot of retrieval to ease them in. Well, actually, retrieval can be really hard. And that's a retrieval question. You know, what was different about Dora's things? That's a really hard question, because actually they've got to have a really good understanding of the text. It's not, the answer's not literally right there. So I just kind of wanted to portray some retrieval and in detail look at this one. So this text, just for the people who aren't in Year 2 to recognise the difficulty, this text is 6 hours later, Dora was still waiting. Hello, said a voice. Have you been here long? Dora turned to see a woman with a little boy smiling up at her. I want to look too, said the boy, so Dora lifted him up. Oh, Mummy shouted, there's a bike in there. Then an old man hurried up and peered through the window too. Look at that lampshade, he cried, just what I always wanted. Now the children in Year 2 are asked, the boy and the old man wanted to buy something at the jumble sale, and they're asked what the boy wanted to buy and what the old man wanted to buy for 1 mark. Now, it's really obvious that the old man wanted to buy a lamp, because he says just what I always wanted. But if we go back to the text, if we're thinking this is retrieval, the little boy just says, oh, Mum, there's a bike in there. He doesn't actually say he wants it. And that's on page 11. But we all know that Year 2 children don't always go to the page they're supposed to. And on page 9, I don't know if you can see that. On page 9, I'll just move it across a little bit to there. Look what's in the picture, a football and a teddy. So loads of Year 2 children wrote the boy wanted to buy a football because it's in the picture 2 pages before. So, and that was for 1 mark, so let's get them both right. So I'm just saying, I just wanted to illustrate retrieval doesn't always mean easy. When we look into Key Stage 1 inference, I just wanted to collect paper 1, multiple choice inference, how did Mum feel inference, and then into paper 2 inference. They would not look out of place on a Key Stage 2 test, any of those items. So giving 2 reasons, we're going to see that on Key Stage 2. So what I'm saying here is, when we look at retrieval or we look at inference, there is a continuum of difficulty. So we can have an easy retrieval and a difficult retrieval, an easy inference and a difficult, but actually it's the text. Now this slide you won't be able to see at all. I appreciate it's tiny, but when you are able to download the slides as a PowerPoint, that will make more sense. And it's basically just showing which content domain was tested in which paper. And I just wanted to illustrate the same point. Key Stage 2 retrieval. I'm just going to zoom in on this question 5 here, the one at look at page 4. In AJ's opinion, how do people feel about the park? Well, that doesn't sound like a retrieval to me. It sounds like an inference. And if children are being taught that's a retrieval question, the answer's obvious. Well, it's not obvious, because it's saying in AJ's opinion. It's obvious if you can understand that middle that text of the park. So true or false being a retrieval question. And again, I know that both of these questions caused no end of pain for Year 6 teachers and the children. Lots of children not getting that mark for the weak bumblebee with the sugary water. So again, are we expecting, when I showed that slide earlier with the ladder, you know, are we expecting precise answers? So let's strip it all back and do the basics. When children give an answer in reading, saying to them, is that the most precise response we could give? And then saying, hang on a minute, tell me what to write, and modelling it. So we've got some more Key Stage 2 inference questions. I just wanted to show that broad range of looking at inference and how it can be assessed in lots of different ways. And then moving into what I love, this impression evidence. I just love teaching this with children. And I don't teach it as a SAT. I teach it as tell me something and give me the evidence. Give me a point and give me the evidence. And I always teach it as a bullet point with an arrow, a bullet point with an arrow. What I love about that question there, question 15, is that's a scaffolded version of question 32. So the point's being given and they need to find the evidence. When they get further on in the test, they've got to do both by themselves. So that is progression of that skill of inference. And it's harder because the third extract, the music box, was harder than the B's. Now, for those who don't do SATs, it's fine. Your summer text will be harder than your spring. So you might teach a scaffolded response in the spring and expect them to be able to do the whole package with a summer text. So this is a slide that I've been using for years, and I don't ever kind of get bored of sharing it. Is everybody writing high quality questions? And I'm sure lots of you will remember from a few years ago, well, it's probably more than a few years ago, we had the King Midas question on a SAT, and whether you know the paper or not, lots of you know the story of King Midas, and the children had to write how he felt at that time. Now those responses are genuine responses from the school I worked at in Salford, and the first response is a year 1 child, then a year 3, then a year 5, then a year 6. Now I'm not interested in SATs here. What I'm interested in is on that spectrum of how articulate these children are. I'm interested in whose response is the most articulate. They're all correct. So how did King Midas feel when his daughter was turned to gold? The year 1 child wrote, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it." That shows regret. The year 3 boy, hilariously, "OMG, I'm devoed." So for those who haven't worked with children who use devoed as a shortened version, a lazy version for devastated, that child still shows that King Midas has got regret, but they've used the word devoed. But they'd still access the mark scheme. And then we've got a year 5 child, "I regret my actions and wish I could turn the clock back," which is obviously more articulate than "I'm devoed." And then we have got a year 6 great adept reader who wrote in the style of the Greek myth, "Oh, forsooth me, how hath I complete such an act?" Very, very different responses, but all showing the same regret. But as a teacher, we can model on a scale which one of those answers is our favourite and why. Now, children might say, "OMG, I'm devoid is my favourite," because that's how they talk. So it's about saying, but which one is most precise, or which one answers the question best. So this, to me, this list is what I would say is nuts and bolts of reading for 2020 into 2021. Vocab's going to be huge. Are all of our team varying how we ask questions, so children don't get into a routine of a retrieval question always starts with who, what, when, why, where. Inference always starts with explain your answers. So, are they able to kind of spin the plates of comprehension? Just asking a basic, have you got the gist of what we just read? I mean, I asked that to a group of children in Oman when I was working in Muscat, and 20 minutes later, they were still discussing the gist of what they'd read. Somebody might have given me inadequate as an Ofsted for progress, but actually those children articulated their responses in a really, really progressive manner across those 20 minutes. The modelling I've already talked about, making sure that over the academic year you've got progression. Fiction, non-fiction, poetry, really big, making sure what we serve up on that diet has got variety, and building up that reserve so that we've got confident readers who can pick something up and make sense of it, even if they've never, ever read that before. And that exposure to quality, we've already talked about that. I'm conscious that lots of you will have questions, and you will be able to download the slides. That's what's the diet of literature like at your school, and it's cut off at the top there, isn't it? I always talk about this. Anyone who's been on any training with me will know this. This is not being classist. I've just got to say this again because it's been recorded. If you brought a loaf of bread from all of these shops, they would cost different prices. And for those not watching from the UK, Aldi and Lidl would be cheaper than Waitrose and Booths. So basically what I'm saying here is your fiction, non-fiction and poetry, is there a disparity in quality? So is your fiction your best, then your non-fiction, and poetry kind of like, oh, it's a bit of a poor relation really? Or do you think, actually, no, Maddie, the quality of all of ours is good. It's all Sainsbury's, it's all medium, it's all run of the middle. So that's just about making sure that we are conscious of the quality of what we're serving up from the national curriculum, and actually for them to be real readers. We need to make sure that it's not just our fiction that's good quality. And then we've got, I always talk about this slide as well. I just wanted to remind everybody before we get to the question time that, you know, this is the team that I would love to have been in. I'm sure they wouldn't want me in their bobsleigh team, but if I had to be in a team, I would want to be in theirs, because they had a real team spirit. But the reason I always use it in the world of education is that there are 4 people in it. So equally with a relay, but I just prefer them. And we've got reception, nursery, year 1 and year 2 in that relay, and everybody is part of the reading. You know, what goes on in phase 1 and 2 phonics with our youngest readers, which is why Ofsted is so bothered about deep dive, because that sets the foundation. And then we bring in the decoding and the comprehension, reception, year 1 and year 2, do an assessment if you're in the UK, or maybe don't do an assessment, but it doesn't really matter. What it's saying is 4 year groups are part of the package. And then key stage 2, obviously we've got year 3, 4, 5, 6, year 6 being a quarter of the team. And actually year 3, 4, what goes on in 3, 4 and 5 is more pivotal than what happens in 6. And that quotation there comes from the Ofsted report of the school that I most recently taught in 2 years ago. And it was only because I got in a bit of a fix with the inspector who asked me why we had no pupil premium greater depth writers. And I said, we just didn't have any. And she wasn't impressed with that. So I launched into how our motto is we're all in it together, and talked about, and she actually put it in the report, which makes me really happy that it made it into something. I felt like it was rubber stamped. Okay, I've put in progression of find and copy because I know lots of children struggle with that. And if you want to, on my YouTube channel, I've got a clip called Are You Reading or Really Reading? And in there's some resources for early years, key stage 1, key stage 2, split into lower and upper. And they really support the skimming and scanning. So for our early years readers, finding and pointing using something like You Choose, and then that progressing to finding and copy. Now, finding and copy questions are not all vocabulary. Some of them are retrieval, some of them are inference. So I just put some progression of find and copy because we get very frustrated with children. But are we modelling that in our what a good one looks like? Do we model going through that process like I guess we would in maths? You know, how do we approach a logical question like that? And I've just put in some resources that I've worked on during lockdown. Now, I know that this is going to be really annoying for anybody who's not in the UK because you haven't got access to Bite Size, so I'm not going to dwell too much on it. But those who are listening from the UK, the Book Club and the Big Read have been great resources. I've been really fortunate to work with the BBC on them. They are basically celebrities reading high quality text that I've chosen. And then I've written the reading activities that you can download. So on the right of Ashley Roberts, you can see the reading activity that goes for that year 2 lesson. And then for a year 6 lesson, you can see they've read The Wolves of Willoughby Chase. And on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see Impression and Evidence. And they are celebrities reading really good clips. So apologies if you can't get the BBC resources. However, everybody can get this. So I know I talked about on the primary rocks, but in case we've got anybody listening tonight who wasn't on that webinar, if you can't take reading books home in the autumn term, you can get a free subscription to Rising Stars Online Library or Cracking Comp, 3 months free, and then obviously they'd like you to buy it, but you don't have to. What I will say about both of those resources is Reading Planet is an online library. As long as your children have got access at home to a computer, then you can get them to read at their book band, and it goes all the way from Lilac with word lists for our nursery children up to year 6. And Cracking Comp are comprehensions in the form of a quiz. So again, they're 2 resources that are free for 3 months. So you'll get 3 months subscription if you sign up to those. And there we go, all the best. And there's some of my favourite characters from literature. I know we're going to have a bit of a Q&A now for the next 20 minutes or so. I'm just going to leave up this slide, which has got my details on, because Fasana's keen. If anybody wants to contact me, I'm more than happy to email people back. The best one is probably my email address rather than the website, because the website is up and running, but it isn't sending me a message if you type in. So use my email, and if you want to use the YouTube channel to watch any more videos that I've done, both for children and their teachers, you can just subscribe to that. And this broadcast will hopefully be on the YouTube channel. So over to Fasana.
Hi, thank you, Maddie. That was brilliant. I've just got messages from colleagues in Qatar who stayed up to watch it. So we're 2 hours behind, and they've found it really useful. And there were a couple of things there that really made me think as well. That link between fluency and reading for pleasure. I didn't think of it like that. So if they are not fluent, how it impacts on their how much pleasure they can get from what they're reading. So that was really interesting. So I'm going to sort of delve deeper into that. And then also summary. Now, because it's not a focus, we teach it, but just passing, and then we focus on inference. And it's interesting what you said about how not being able to summarize, how it can be detrimental to when they doing inference, for example. So they were 2 things that I just quickly jotted down for me, that 2 things I feel like we need to do more in my school. So yeah, that I found it really interesting, and I'll play it back, and I'm sure there'll be other things as well. I'll just quickly go through some questions that people have asked. Let me see if I can see names. Yes, someone asked whether the slides will be available. I think they joined a little bit later. So yes, the slides will be available on the whole class reading group. As soon as Maddie emails them to me, I'll add them to the files, so they will be there. And as Maddie mentioned, this the PowerPoint, today's session will be shared on Maddie's YouTube channel as well. Right, so let's quickly go through. Yeah, lots of thank yous, Maddie, there. I think it was really useful. Questions. Oh, yes. How do you include non-fiction texts in the curriculum?
Well, I would say I know lots of teachers are teaching English rounded text, and I would say that more common they're using fiction. So I would ordinarily use the non-fiction to supplement the text where possible, and obviously to support your other subjects, history, geography, science. There are loads of amazing non-fiction texts that would make an English rounded book text. All the Marcia Williams books, the comic strip books are brilliant for that. And just what I can see there, that something's flashed up about what are your thoughts on the whole class reading and reading carousel debate. So I'm just going to overlap these 2 questions, if you don't mind, Fasana. I'm just going to put them together. What a lot of schools do is they use a really, really good fiction as their English rounded book. So they'll do all of their reading and writing skills in English using a really good fiction, and they'll use their guided reading time to use some really good high quality non-fiction and poetry, including song lyrics. So by the end of the academic year, you could say, right, my year 4 children have read The day I was read by Lisa Thompson in English, but we've also looked at non-fiction related to the text in guided reading, and we've done some song lyrics related to the characters' feelings. So we've got our poetry in. In terms of the whole class versus small group carousel, you know, there's ambassadors out there who would fight for both sides. I'm not. People accuse me of sitting on the fence, but I'm not in a position to get on one side of the camp, because I think it absolutely categorically depends on your class and your cohort, and they might need small group in the autumn term and whole class in. Do you know what I mean? I think we've got to be flexible to the needs of our children. Fazana, have you frozen there? I think she might have frozen. I'm not sure what's happened. So I'll keep talking. Hopefully you can all hear, but it looks like Fazana's frozen on the screen. So instead of getting hung up on whether we do whole class and reading carousel, I don't mean that in a patronising way at all. I just mean that you know what's right for your children. So if the children in your setting need small group because you've got so many different needs, or if you're doing a whole class guided read, you're going to sit with a small group. So I would always say that when we teach reading, we do both. We tend to do a lot of whole class reading and also small group. I can see that Fazana's gone off the screen, but I know that we're still live. So I'm going to see if I can have a little look down the side at any questions. I can see somebody asking about recommending any useful assessment packages. So I can also see that other people have recommended NFER, NTSA, PIRA, Puma, basically just to give you a little bit more, because somebody's put there, can you give us a bit more detail? I write for Rising Stars, so I'm the series editor on the NTSA papers. Basically, the NFER papers give you a standardised score. The Rising Star optional tests give you a SATs outcome, like working towards working at and greater depth. But the NTS tests, which a lot of people are commenting on, do both. So when you do an NTSA test with Rising Stars, you will get a standardised score, like this child's got a reading age of 9.4, plus this child is working at in year 4. So you get both. And that's, Rising Stars have been amazing to kind of blend what they got in NFER and PIRA with an optional SAT. So you end up with 2 outcomes. So for those children who might be working towards all year in year 4 on a test, they might be working towards in autumn, still working towards in spring, but with a better score, and still working towards in summer, but with a better score, but still in that. So on paper, that child looks like they've working towards, but actually alongside it, they might have an age of 7.4, an age of 7.8, and an age of 8.2. I'm just going to add Fazana back into the stream.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I'm back.
Talking about the assessment papers, well, because I could see that question. So somebody's put, if you Google NTS Rising Stars, it'll bring them up, and you can also download a sample. So have a little look into that.
I just wanted to ask, I don't know if it was answered, Maddie, with that question about non-fiction books. Do they, when you're choosing non-fiction books, would you recommend that they are linked to the topic? So if the topic is Vikings, for example, the books you use, would you recommend that they are, or would you, focus on the comprehension strategies being told, or link the books to all the topics that you're teaching?
It's really hard because I know lots of schools are trying to do that. And then I get emails from frustrated teachers saying, Maddie, have you got a really good novel about the Vikings for you? And I'll say, no, but I've got a really good novel for year 5. So sometimes it feels contrived. Or have you got a really good novel about the Mayans? Because all my reading's got to be about the Mayans. And I think that's capping the curriculum. Where it fits, I think it's great. So if you're doing the Vikings in spring 2, then I would, in spring 1, do some non-fiction and guided reading about the Vikings to give them pre-reading. And you can get really good. I know I keep saying Marcia Williams, but all her nonfiction, the comic strip books are brilliant. The vocabulary, but I wouldn't force it. If there's not a really good fiction, because I'm nothing against Jeremy Strong's Egyptian pyramid books, Pharaoh book. There's a pharaoh in my suitcase or whatever it is. But they're not the highest quality of vocab, but they match the topic, so they're being chosen. So I would just be careful with that. I think they're okay to do as a reading for pleasure, but if they're your reading spine to teach your reading skills, you've got to have the right tool for the job.
Well, thank you.
I wouldn't force it. Fazana, can I just say, somebody's asked about Darren Shetty, what was his Twitter handle?
Yes, sorry, it came up at the start, yeah.
Darren's Twitter handle, I'll just type it in here. I think it's this, so I'll just check it. It's rap. I might have made it sounded like rat. I think it's at Rap Classroom, but I'm just going to check it on my Twitter. But if you're on Twitter and you're not following Darren Shetty, I strongly advise that you do. Just because he's amazing. He writes a lot for universities, so he's really academic. But then if you get a chance to hear him talk, he's really normal. So he's really supported by at Rap Classroom. So I've put it next to mine. That's Darren Shetty, who'll be able to really, really talk about literature for BAME and diversity. He's brilliant.
And we've got a couple more questions. There's a question from Claire. What would you recommend for children who still haven't grasped phonics by year 4?
I'd stop it. I'd stop the phonics. I mean, phonics is not for every child. There'll be some adults watching this saying phonics didn't work for me, and they're now a fully professional teacher who's a fluent reader, but they will have been taught with a different way. So there's lots of interventions out there that are not phonic based. I would say if phonics hasn't worked, but if they don't pass it in year 3, I'd move on to something else, either speed reading, fluency, word recognition, skimming and scanning, observational, perhaps looking for cognitive reasons of why they've not picked it up. If you haven't got the I'll add it to this PowerPoint before I send it to you, Fazana. But Lancaster University did like an outline of a house, and in all of the windows they put a different skill for reading, and phonics was just a quarter of the house. The rest of it was like semantic, syntactic, memory, working memory, vocab acquisition, all the other reasons why they might not be a fluent reader. So I'll add that in before I send it to you, and that might help that person with that question.
Yeah, and I think it's having, so in Key Stage 1, and there are several, even when you've resat in year 2, we still end up with children, and then you're thinking, you've only got time to do one intervention, spending all that time doing phonics, and they're not going to get it. So yeah, that will be really useful. We've got a question from Jackie, who wants to, again, a phonics related question. She wants to find out more about deep dive in phonics.
If she means about the questions, do you think that's what Jackie means there?
And I've been in Qatar for 2-3 years. I'm assuming Ofsted deep dive.
The questions that they might ask a phonics lead. What I'll do is I'll add a document. I'm just going to make a list, otherwise I'll forget what to send you. I'll add a document that can go. Can a document go in the Drive as well, Fazana?
Yeah, I can add that. Yeah,
I'll add a document which is the deep dive questions about phonics, and the person who asked for it probably won't want it when they see it. But what it will do is give you an overview of what you might be asked. Basically, the English hubs have done a lot of work on this. So the English hubs have got a lot of literature on their auditing of phonics. If you've got a phonics scheme that works in your school and you can justify the one you've chosen, you don't have to do the one that's promoted. I'm not saying too much there. If you've got a phonics scheme that works, use it and justify it that it works for your school and your staff. the whole phonically decodable books, you know, are the children taking home a reading book that is aligned to what they're reading in phonics, has caused a lot of unrest across the UK, because your reading scheme might not apply the phonics they were taught that day. And, you know, that's one of the questions. Does your home reading scheme give the children an opportunity to apply what they've learned in phonics that day? There's ways around that. There's ways of giving them a resource from the phonics group to take home in addition to the reading book. And just on the topic of that, when we're allowed to take reading books home, I would really push that our youngest readers are taking a book like The Highway Rat or We're Going on a Bear Hunt, as well as their book banded book, because they need to see a real book with real narrative. There's very, very few home reading books at the lower end that you can ask an inference question. But actually, if the child took home The Highway Rat with a blue book, the parent can ask more questions with The Highway Rat. They'll be exposed to more language. And the way we got around that, and I know lots of you will have done it, is said to the parents, the book that they take home that's a colour book, they should read. The other one, please, will you read it? And that's really good for Key Stage 2 children who are still reading on low book bands, because they could still take home a Roald Dahl, the BFG in year 3, even though they're on a low reading book and haven't passed the phonics screening. But they shouldn't not be taking home a real book as well. So I'm passionate about that, really.
Right, thank you, Maddie. Got a question from Roller. Are there any books you'd recommend for year 2 autumn term? I know you mentioned that you recommended a couple during the session. Are there any others you'd recommend for autumn term? For year 2.
Year 2 autumn. I've just done a really nice unit of work with a school in Liverpool on Star in the Jar and the Night Box. Star in the Jar, I can't remember the name of the author. The Night Box is Louise Grieg. They're both, and Mole Star as well, by Britta Teckentrup. So all three of them have kind of got a theme of friendship. And Star in the Jar is a little boy who finds a star, and he doesn't know who it belongs to, so he keeps it in a jar. And then one night there's a message in the sky that says, "We've lost our friend," made up of stars. So he puts it back. Mole Star is a mole that takes all the stars out of the sky to put them in his, what does a mole live in? A den? A burrow?
Is it a burrow?
Is it a burrow? Well, he puts, I don't know, someone will correct us. He puts all the stars underground, and then all the animals can't see, and then he has to put them back. And the Night Box is very lyrical, so that would be a great one for year 2, but I'd do the other 2 first. Is a little boy who unlocks a box and lets the night out and the day in, but it's almost poetical. So those 3 together as a book study. There's also Lemony Snicket, isn't it? Afraid of the Dark, and Orion and the Dark. They're all really nice because they do fit in with the science, but they're also, you know, should you take a star if it's not yours? They've got some quite P for C conversations, so I would recommend those.
Yeah, I think we've got time for just one more question. It's quite an interesting question, actually. It's from Emily. Do you think class reads should be chosen by the class teacher, or should themes and recommended text be allocated to each year group by the literacy lead? That's it does happen, yeah.
It's really interesting that, and having spent I don't know, 18 years as an English lead across 3 different schools, I would hate for people to be typing in that Maddie made us do this book, because I know at certain times in my career, when I was at a school in special measures, I did set out the curriculum for the first year and said, this is what we're doing. But after that year, I asked teachers to choose. But for 1 year, to get us all on the straight and narrow, I did kind of say, I'd like everyone to do these texts. What I would say now is I would expect there to be a professional discussion around it. If a teacher's new to a year group, then they normally want advice from the English lead. And this, sorry if I offend anyone here, but I know that if somebody had said to me, you have to teach The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, I would have left, because I couldn't have taught it with passion. But there'll be loads of people in here saying, you might love that book. I'd love that book. How can you say that about that book? Narnia is amazing. I think when it's a picture book or a short text, it doesn't have as much. It means more with a novel, because if the teacher is not loving the novel, the children will know that.
Yeah, and it's, yeah, they pick up on, and then you can't model, you know, with enthusiasm what, you know, you're trying to develop a love for reading, but if you're not feeling it, it's not going to come across. Yeah.
And they can see it. They know when we're being fake. They absolutely know it. So in some situations, I think the English lead has to take the bull by the horns and make a decision. But if you've got an experienced teacher who's passionate about English and goes, look, this book is just brilliant and I really want to do it, and they say why, I would definitely, as an English lead, say, go for it. So I think you've got to do that on a case-by-case situation. Really.
We've run out of time, Maddie, and I know there's a few more questions, but you're on the group, and I know maybe at later date you might be able to answer some of the questions. I know there's a couple there right at the end, but I just want to say, I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone that joined us. This will be available, the slides Maddie shared will be available in the file section of the group, and the video on Maddie's YouTube channel. And thanks again, Maddie, for sharing your wisdom on reading with us today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you.
Yeah,
bye.
thanks, everybody. And thanks for everyone who stayed up really late across the world.
Yeah.
Big thanks to you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye. Bye, everyone.